Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene. You are back with me again on Durian ASEAN, and together with Mustafa Akyol, a journalist and also the author of a book where he spoke a lot about the importance of liberalism, especially in the Muslim community. In a liberal society, people are free to do whatever they want, and free to either believe in religion or do not believe in religion. But wouldn't this limit the spread of Islam to non-believers because they have a choice to choose whatever belief system that they want to choose?
Well, actually, liberalism helps the spread of Islam. That's why a lot of converts are there in the Western society today. In the West, in the liberal West, Muslims can go open mosques, they can go open institutions, they can spread free Qurans on the streets. And thanks to that, sometimes people in the West who are not Muslims learn about Islam, and some of them are influenced and fascinated, and they take the Shahada and they become Muslims. So in that sense, liberalism can help you. Liberalism allows ideas to meet with each other, to sometimes struggle with each other, have a conversation with each other. Should Muslims be afraid of this? Mm-hmm. Well, I say no. If we are confident about our religion, about the truth of our religion, why should we be afraid of a free conversation? Why should we be afraid of a marketplace of ideas, as they sometimes say? We should also not forget that we Muslims are generally very proud of our initial centuries, right? We say, oh, we had great scholars who discovered mathematics and algebra and science, and Ibn Sina and Farabi, they're great names. Well, they were so productive in the initial stages of Islam because they were not afraid. They learned from Greek philosophy, they learned from Christian and Jewish or Indian or Chinese wisdom. They synthesized them with Islam, and they had a very productive era. Once we started to stagnate in our intellectual level, we close our minds, we didn't change. We didn't develop from the 13th to the 19th century. At the same time, the West had an amazing development, created modernity, schools, universities. That was thanks to liberalism. I mean, the West is powerful today because it became more liberal. It allowed new ideas. So if we want to be, again, a powerful, admirable civilization in the sense that the civilization we are carrying is admired and respected, we also need liberalism in the sense that allowing free ideas to float around and enrich our understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm. But there are so many versions of Islam in today's society, and some communities of Muslim, they are scared that their values, their culture, their identity will be eroded by other Muslim groups who probably have greater funding, greater resources to spread their religion. So when you say it's a marketplace of ideas, it's also a time where minority groups would have a hard time to be able to maintain their identity, and perhaps that's also the reason why some of them become more and more conservative. A lot of countries where there's Muslim majority, governments in those countries try to protect society by putting borders on what version of Islam that is acceptable.
Very good question. First of all, yes, there are many interpretations of Islam, and let me ask you a question. Which one is the right one?
It's actually a question mark to me too.
Well, all of them say we are the right one. Mm-hmm. And my answer is that, well, I don't know. Only God knows. Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a verse in the Quran which says Allah will decide upon the things you disagreed when you go to afterlife, when you go to Him, and after you die. So there are different interpretations of Islam, and we can't say this one is the ultimate right one or wrong one. The only thing we can have is that there should not be an interpretation of Islam which condemns other Muslims. I think you can say I'm from the Hanafi school or the Shafi school, or I am Shia, or I'm this, I'm that. All these are different understandings of Islam. Of course, everybody is in that interpretation because they think this is the right one. They have the right. But once they start to excommunicate other Muslims, once they are saying you're murtad, you're kafir, you're unbeliever, and you should be executed, you should be killed for that is not the thing we cannot accept. Other than that, we should have that plurality. The question you put actually is also interesting. Like, what about if some of these are better funded? And so that's a really good question, an important one. And yes, I understand sometimes that countries can be a little bit more concerned about the influx of different understanding of Islam, which is coming from foreign sources. What should be done in that case? Well, a foreign influx of money can be controlled, because that's something states can control legitimately. Plus, what you should need is to then finance other or more authentic or traditional understanding of Islam. At least you have a balance. Because one thing we are hearing today in the Muslim world today is that the Salafi interpretation, which is very literalist and strict, is being promoted with a lot of oil money behind us in the Muslim world. And
unfortunately, now the oil prices have gone down.
Well, you see, sometimes the market helps. If oil prices go down, ultimately the market fluctuates.
They have to sit down for a while.
Yeah. I mean, that might be a legitimate concern. But again, the solution is not authoritarianism, but also to create then alternatives and local understandings of Islam, revitalizing their own tradition. The thing is, banning something generally doesn't save us. Dealing with it helps us.
When you mention dealing with it, are you suggesting any concrete solution, like creating more platform of dialogue between different ideas?
Certainly, I am suggesting that, for example, in the Muslim world, in the academia, in the media, there should be more freedom. So Muslims should be able to discuss, first of all, things that they agree on and disagree on. If a Shiite scholar comes in, I'm Sunni, coming from a Sunni tradition, I should not be afraid to hear the Shiite understanding of Islam. I should be able to hear that. I should be able to see where we agree and disagree, and maybe learn from it, and maybe share my tradition, and maybe that person can learn from that.
And you should be able to freely say whatever you want without worrying after you go back home there would be someone stabbing you from behind.
Exactly, someone calling me a traitor and a murtad and so on and so forth. Islam was most powerful when we had that diversity. Baghdad in the 12th, 11th century was the place where you had different schools of thought, Hanbalis and Mu'tazila, Shia and Hanafi, and Shafis, and all of that. And there was a dialogue between them. The more we kill that dialogue and one version of the faith becomes dominant in this society, the other one becomes in that society, that intellectually suffocated us. And therefore, I think in the academia first, in the media, these ideas should be discussed. What change do we need should be discussed. I mean, do we need more ijtihad? Do we need more reinterpretation of Islamic law? The schools of jurisprudence we have today at hand were mainly developed in the 9th, 10th centuries, which is like more than 1,000 years ago. They applied Islam to their context, to their era, to their questions. Now we have new questions. How do we deal with these?
That's true.
We have to be able to open up minds. So now the conservative answer is that they say, oh no, ijtihad is important, but you don't have enough scholarship to do ijtihad, ilm. You don't have enough. Who has that? Well, the people who has that won't touch it anyway. So at a time when the world has changed immensely, Muslims have closed all the channels of change. And hence we have a gap between the modern world, the modern understanding, and our religious tradition.
When Islam started to become associated with authoritarianism?
Good question. Well, there were always authoritarian tendencies, like in every religion from the very beginning. In the modern world, in the 20th century especially. Why? Because actually Islam has a notion of rights of minorities and women and so on and so forth. But in the modern world, these rights have gone up to the sky. And Muslim tradition said, well, we do give Christians the right to have their churches, but that's it. We don't give them the right to evangelize. Or yes, women have the right to have inheritance, but not exactly the same with men. But in the modern world, those rights have become totally equal. So I think with the development of modernity, the gap between freedoms in the Muslim world and in the West became an issue. Before that, 1,000 years ago, Muslims were the liberals. I mean, Christians thought that the Muslim society is too liberal. Women have these rights. Incredible. Women can have some inheritance, some property. That was unthinkable in medieval Christian Europe. But when West, through liberalism, moved on to have this Universal Declaration of Human Rights and equal rights for everybody, then you see a gap between the Muslim world and the liberal West.
Do you think history and the current modern economic system has anything to do with Muslim communities who are mainly not from very rich society decided that they need to protect their identity from all these quote-unquote foreign sources?
Of course, I mean, actually, it's not just a matter of Muslims. I mean, every non-Western actually civilization and society in the modern world faces this issue. How do we protect ourselves from the so-called cultural imperialism of the West? Now, there are two ways to do this. One way is to say, let's create a cultural bubble. Let's close ourselves to the world.
Which is what we are seeing. People are becoming more conservative.
Yeah, well, the country that does this best is North Korea, which has closed its borders to all foreign influence. There's no internet, no travel, nothing. You just say we are the best nation on earth, and you think that this is the world it is. Well, it's not a good model, as you can see. Then there's a South Korean model, which opened up to the world and actually developed and become
and they have their own problems too.
They have problems too, but if you compare to North and South, you will see the difference. One is openness, the other one is authoritarianism. Well, we don't have North Korea versions of Islam, obviously, but the thing is, in the modern world, if you create a bubble, cultural bubble, trying to protect yourself, you're weakening yourself. What you have to do is to reinterpret and reproduce your tradition. Let me give you one example. There is this phenomenon of Hollywood, right? Most people are complaining about Hollywood because they make these very fascinating films, they spread American culture. While the Indians did something, they did Bollywood. So they created an alternative film industry, learning something from Hollywood, but something from within their own tradition, right? It's just something. Will we have Muslim Bollywoods? Will we have a Muslim film industry? We have some films produced in the Muslim world, but it is nothing to compare to it. Some people will say it's haram, like these images are not allowed. I mean, that will block us from creating this modern art that we need to compete with. But the thing is that you can, in the modern world, you can advance your faith by using the modern tools and reproducing your tradition. Mm-hmm. Do we have Islamic modern art museums? Well, maybe a few, but maybe we need more. Do we have Islamic novels? Do we have Islamic poetry? We have something in the tradition, but are we reproducing it? Mm. To be able to reproduce it, first we have to see the quality in the world. We have to see the standards in the world. What about Islamic universities? Do we have Harvards? Do we have Oxford University? Do we have Muslim? I mean, are we good at that? To be able to be that, we have to be first able to learn what is being discussed there. But if you say, this is haram, this should not be learned, we're not going to get there. We will only create a cultural bubble in which we think we're preserving our identity, but we are actually weakening ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, we'll take another short break. When we return, we'll discuss further on Islam and liberalism.